Western Russia, 1943. Vast German and Soviet armies clash in history's greatest and deadliest tank battle.
The earth was trembling, as if there was a huge earthquake.
2,500 German panzers and assault guns face more than 5,000 Soviet tanks. By the time it's over, the casualties will reach more than 200,000.
The gunners told me later that all they saw were grey walls. They were just firing and firing.
The earth and sky were burning.
This is the bloody Battle of Kursk.
Tanks were on top of tanks. Soldiers on soldiers. Sheer terror.
July 5th, 1943. Day one of Hitler's Operation Citadel. More than 800 German tanks roll across the Russian plain towards the town of Kursk. Waiting for them are the Soviets, defending their homeland with the biggest tank army ever assembled. This is Hitler's final attempt at turning the tide of war on the Eastern Front. A war that for the last several months has been going very badly for the Germans. Since their disastrous defeat at Stalingrad in February of 1943, Soviet forces have been relentlessly battering the Germans, forcing them into a 180-mile fighting retreat back towards Germany. By the end of the winter, the German army on the Eastern Front is shattered and teeters on the brink of destruction. But Hitler is determined to reclaim the initiative in the East, and he makes plans for a massive counteroffensive. His plan is to launch a large-scale pincer maneuver to cut off the Soviet-held salient centered on the industrial town of Kursk. The goal? Encircle and destroy the 500,000 Soviet forces in the Kursk Bulge. But the battlefield is huge. 200 kilometers long and 150 kilometers deep, most of it rolling farmland. In the wide open spaces of the fabled Russian steppes, it's ideal for tank warfare. It's a formidable objective. And over the spring and early summer, the Germans amassed two entire army groups. 780,000 men, close to 10,000 guns, and 2,500 tanks. An immense force that will shake Mother Russia to the core. But this buildup has not gone unnoticed. And as the Germans prepare for Operation Citadel, so do the Soviets.
Now the enemy is gathering its massive power. He wants to gain revenge for their defeat in Stalingrad. So our commanders decided to regroup in the spring and regroup us in preparation for defense. Either we would attack right away or by defending and exhaust our enemy.
To meet the impending German attack, the Soviets build up almost 2 million men, 25,000 guns, and more than 5,000 tanks. And all across the Kursk salient, they dig in.
We had several lines stretching about 300 kilometers or so along the front. And the earth was so dug up. We had about 400 kilometers of trenches. The army and civilians did that, working on making anti-tank ditches, which tanks would not be able to get out of. And also in the places where the tanks were in danger of getting through, we made minefields. And that wasn't just in one place. It was almost along the entire length of the defensive lines. We had anti-tank guns, and they were amazing. And of course, tanks.
The backbone of the Soviet Armored Corps is the T-34 medium tank. With a 76mm main cannon and 47mm of sloping frontal armor, the 31-ton T-34 has a deadly balance of firepower, protection, and mobility. By the summer of 1943, Soviet factories have produced tens of thousands of them. And all across the Kursk salient, the T-34s move into position. July 5th, 1943. After 3 months of preparation, the Germans are finally ready for their attack. 1 hour before Operation Citadel is to begin, Soviet gunners unleash a massive artillery attack on German positions.
All of a sudden, such a huge noise started, you could go deaf from it. The earth was trembling, as if there was a huge earthquake. Germans were astounded. They never expected this from France.
As it was dusk, it looked like fireworks. When the Stalin orgle exploded, the barrage was so intense, it actually destroyed the position. This caused lots of casualties right from the beginning. But something must have happened, as it was impossible for the Russians to figure the time of the attack, exactly 1 hour prior to the planned attack.
But the Soviets knew the time of the attack to the minute. They'd captured a team of German sappers who revealed it under interrogation. The artillery barrage causes chaos in German lines and delays the launch of Operation Citadel. But only for 1 hour. Shortly after dawn, the Germans attack.
Masses of tanks, about 500-600 were coming, a horrid amount of tanks.
The German tanks were advancing towards us. Each tank carried 20 to 30 devils, and all of them were drunk like shoemakers.
And that's when all hell broke loose.
The earth and sky were burning. Tanks were on top of tanks. Soldiers on soldiers. Armageddon. But we kept our word. No backing away, not even a step. For Stalin.
By the end of the day, the Germans have made only modest inroads into the vast network of Soviet defenses along the Kursk salient. In the south, the German Fourth Army's panzers advance only 20 kilometers, while in the north, the Ninth Army has fared even worse, with gains of only 10 kilometers at a cost of dozens of tanks and more than 1,000 men. So far, Operation Citadel is going nowhere. And now, Soviet forces along the northern shoulder of the Kursk Bulge prepare to counterattack.
100 tanks from the brigade moved forward. Can you imagine a field, an open field, and you are driving towards each other? Whoever gets whoever first. The enemy position had 56 tanks, and in front of us we counted 17 Tigers.
The Tiger is the German army's biggest tank. Encased in over 100 millimeters of armor, it is practically impervious to frontal attack. But it is the Tiger's 88-millimeter cannon, with a range of more than 2 kilometers, that makes it the deadliest weapon on the Kursk battlefield.
And the horrible epic battle began. Half of our tanks were lightweight. They ran on gas, and they would burn up like candles. I'm sorry, but here you can't tell. I came out of the bushes from the battle, and behind me the Tigers. So I fired about 2 times at a time. Our tank had 76-millimeter gun. It didn't penetrate their tank. But our anti-tank unit was close by, and they finished him. We began destroying each other. Huge losses, but the enemy had huge losses too. The Germans would come this way about 4 or 5 times. My lid was open, so I could look out and find the target. And in jumps the commander of my battalion. His tank got hit, and it burned out. Enemy infantry surrounded, so he decided to hide in mine. And as soon as he jumps into my tank, I get hit. His head is just ripped off. I was drenched in blood. His brain, everything was all over. As soon as you see the anti-tank gun pointed towards you, as soon as you can, just shoot and get him, or else you die. And I ran over all of them, along with their entire crew. And that's the kind of hell it was on July 6th.
In less than 2 days of fighting, tens of thousands of men die on both sides, and the hulks of hundreds of tanks lie in the burning fields around Kursk. And it's only the beginning. The Germans now prepare to strike again. Their target, the small rural village of Panary, a quiet railway stop that is about to become ground zero in one of the bloodiest battles of the Second World War. July 5th, 1943. In an effort to change their fortunes on the Eastern Front, the Germans launch a massive armored offensive against Soviet defenses on the plains of Western Russia. The objective of Operation Citadel is to encircle and destroy Soviet forces in the bulge around the industrial town of Kursk. The Soviets put up a stubborn defense against the advancing panzers. There are heavy losses on both sides, and by the end of the second day, the Germans have made only modest gains. Now, more than a day behind schedule, and determined to take Kursk, Field Marshal Walter Model launches a new assault. His target, the railway town of Panary. Panary is on the main line between Arel and Kursk, making it a central collection and distribution point for farms in the area. If Model and his 9th Army are to take Kursk, they must first take Panary. But Soviet Field Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky knows the strategic value of the town. He digs in with a massive force of tanks and guns and lays thousands of mines. Little Panary Station now becomes the most heavily fortified point along the entire Kursk salient.
То есть вот с этих полей сюда, в сторону лесного массива, двигались немецкие танки, за танками шла пехота врага, и вот эти пехотинцы, сидящие в окопах, наши стрелки. Рокоссовский, готовясь к оборонительному сражению, поставил задачу перед саперами создать 3 линии обороны. Все 3 линии обороны были глубоко эшелонированные, много рядов окопов. Она имела заграждение из колючей проволоки. И обязательно очень много между вот этими колючей проволокой, между окопами располагалось очень много минных полей.
The artillery and tanks were dug into the earth. This is front of us is a dugout where tanks would be buried. Such dugouts we would call kapanira. It contains 3 sharp walls and 1 flat entrance. The tank would drive into it so that its turret and main tank gun were level with
дуло танка лежало на земле, а сам танк являлся грозным оружием для
the enemy, and this particular territory found itself the very epicenter of the battle.
The Germans and Soviets engage in a vicious seesaw battle for control of Panary. The town changes hands 5 times in a single day. The Germans send wave after wave of panzers into the fight. Many are destroyed by mines, T-34s, and anti-tank guns. On July 9th, the Germans attack northeast of the village, striking Soviet positions on high ground, designated on their maps as Hill 253.5.
Our division, the Sturmgeschütz 177, joined the others on July 9th. We were supposed to attack a hill that was occupied by the enemy. We used assault guns, infantry, and 1 unit of brand new Ferdinand tank destroyers.
The Ferdinand is Germany's newest self-propelled gun, never before used in battle. It's a 65-ton monster with 200 millimeters of protective armor plating and twin 300-horsepower engines that move it along at 30 kilometers an hour. But its most dangerous feature is its 6-meter-long, high-velocity 88-millimeter cannon.
And we had big hopes for these tanks, which were able to shoot with their 88mm cannons at a distance of 3,200 yards. The Ferdinand could not handle the ascent of the hill. We thought they had got hit by artillery, but after they caught fire, one after the other, we assumed that the engines were overheated and exploded. The crews got out and ran away. And once again, we depended on the Sturmgeschütz.
The Germans' most widely produced assault gun is the Sturmgeschütz, or Stug. Built on a Panzer III chassis, the turretless Stug is armed with a high-velocity 75mm cannon and is Germany's most successful tank destroyer.
The attack started, and we drove across a minefield up the hill. The Russian artillery was attacking us like hell. Our commander was standing in the hut to show us that we have to spread out. He got hit and was killed. One of the tanks got hit on one of the trucks, and the truck flew off.
Although they lose more than half of their Stugs, the German advance breaks through Rokossovsky's first line of defense.
We fought our way across the first row of ditches and took the second row of ditches, and the Russians retreated. There was a very narrow turn, and immediately behind it there was a Russian anti-tank gun. Those who managed to escape were shot by the infantry. Shortly behind the next turn, there was another anti-tank gun. We could not react that fast. All I could call out to the driver was, "Hit it full throttle."
July 9th, 1943. The Battle of Kursk enters its fifth bloody day, with the German Ninth Army still unable to penetrate the Russian defenses in the northern sector. The Germans, desperate to complete their drive to Kursk, launch an enormous armored assault on the strategically important town of Ponary. Their goal? Seize the high ground northeast of the village, known as Hill 253.5.
We fought our way across the first row of ditches and took the second row of ditches, and the Russians retreated. Shortly behind the next turn, there was another anti-tank gun. We couldn't react that fast. And all I could call out to the driver was, "Hit it full throttle." drove towards the anti-tank gun and managed to more or less crush it. We managed to move forward quite far. The tank appeared in front of me. The T-34 was approaching us fast. And we fired the first shot with the anti-tank shell. The shell bounced off, and we were afraid that our shells might not have the power to destroy a tank at this distance.
The T-34's 47 millimeters of frontal armor is sloped at a 60-degree angle, enabling it to deflect oncoming shells and giving the equivalent of almost 75 millimeters of head-on armored protection.
But the tank had been shocked and moved sideways. We managed to shoot it in the side, and it blew up right away. Our tank shells had the ability to punch through tanks. They only exploded shortly after piercing the tank's steel wall. Therefore, the destruction of the tank and its crew was guaranteed.
By the end of the day, the Germans finally capture Hill 253.5, taking heavy losses, but inflicting worse on the Soviet defenders, who fight to the last man.
The German demons were aiming to have the Soviets panic and leave. But our soldiers, with our general's command, did not even shudder. We were not afraid. Soldiers didn't think about putting their life to an end. If they had to slide under a tank, they did just that in order to save them.
The strategy of the Russian tank troops was, to put it like this, stubborn. Stubbornly, they were attacking at the same spot, over and over again. Although former attacks had been fended off and lots of tanks were standing on the field, burning. And the next wave followed, and the next one.
No stepping back. Those were our orders.
Before the battle, each soldier, each officer is the same. Forgive me, but everyone wants to live. And when the enemy started their attack, this is when the battle went on. Everything in fire, everything in smoke, just like the old saying goes, as thick as the smoke in a crematorium. That's how it was. There is a particular way of dealing with and battling tanks, which is the same for all tanks. Everyone had a goal of letting the tank come as near as it could to you and shoot into the most vulnerable places on the tank. There is no point in shooting into the head of the tank because it had about 100-150 millimeters of armor. You always aim to destroy its sides. I would shoot at the tanks with armor-piercing shells. I would see that I hit the jacket. But the missile itself bounced off and went upwards. that time, the enemy tank aimed at me and shot at me.
July 11th, 1943. It's been 6 days since Hitler's Operation Citadel began. And his massive panzer armies have made only modest gains. In the south, the German Fourth Army, spearheaded by 3 elite SS panzer divisions, has penetrated just 50 kilometers into the Kursk salient. And in the north, Model's Ninth Army has advanced only 20 kilometers towards Kursk. In order to finally achieve a breakthrough, Model prepares for one final attack and commits all of his remaining reserves, hoping to finally crack the stubborn Russian defenses at Ponary.
Just like the old saying goes, that's how it was. Everyone had a goal of letting the tank come as near as it could to you and shoot into the most vulnerable places on the tank. There is no point in shooting into the head of the tank because it had about 100-150 millimeters of armor. You always aim to destroy its sides. I would shoot at the tanks with armor-piercing shells. I would see that I hit the jackpot. But the missile itself bounced off and went up. In that time, the enemy tank aimed at me, shot at me, but didn't get me. I managed to hide in the bushes. If I hadn't, I would have been destroyed. So I came out, and I was behind a burning Katyusha rocket launcher.
Я за нее,
наверное,
несколько, говорят, спрятался, когда и остановился, чтобы можно было и сходу стрелять. И почти не в лоб, так почти в борт.
Then I shot and got the tank in the side arm.
Попал,
You see the entire crew
выскочил,
jump out.
так.
Возле танок Once the tank was down and burning, the German tankers would climb out and we would react right away. We'd kill them, so there the tank would be burning and beside lay 3 to 4 dead bodies of German devils.
After almost a week of intense fighting, the Germans are exhausted and battered, and they haven't even taken Ponary. But they've inflicted huge losses on the Soviets, who seem to have endless reserves of men and T-34s for the fight.
The tanks drove against each other, and there was shooting everywhere. The gunners told me later that all they saw were grey walls, and they were just firing and firing. During the combat, my steering had been damaged. We couldn't move forward and steer. We had to drive backwards to steer instead. And of course, this was an immense handicap. And so I decided to drive back and gave notice to the command post that I was returning to the garage. While I was standing there, a T-34 came at us at full speed. I shot the tank, and it started burning right away. I asked my comrades what had happened. They told me that Russian tanks managed to break into the weapons reserve Kursk area.
Leichte Artillerie ihre Stellung bezogen hatte und die wollten die wahrscheinlich vernichten und haben es auch zum Teil geschafft. Und jetzt begann
now a tank battle started, the likes of which had never been seen before and will not be experienced again anytime soon.
What Bose and the rest of the Germans on the northern front are experiencing is just the beginning of a massive Russian counteroffensive, one that will determine the outcome of the Battle of Kursk and will ultimately change the course of the Second World War. The Battle of Kursk enters its second bloody week. The losses on both sides have been enormous. 80,000 men killed and more than 2,000 tanks destroyed. On the northern front, the Germans have lost 21,000 men and 50% of their armored strength. They have no reserve forces left. Model is no longer able to attack. But despite even heavier losses, the Soviets are able to field more than 400,000 men, 15,000 guns, and almost 1,400 tanks. With these deep reserves, they launch Operation Kutuzov.
We received reinforcements. Those units that were really out of shape from the battle and lost too many lives and equipment were relieved. We had a goal set for each division and region. The rest of us went on forward with the attack. That's when the enemy suffered heavy losses. And we started a new operation.
It begins on July the 12th. Their aim is to smash through the largely undefended flank of Model's 9th Army. This attack marks the end of Hitler's Operation Citadel and heralds the beginning of the Russian summer offensive.
All of a sudden, I was standing in a lower area surrounded by bushes and trees and was observing the enemy's flank. After a while, I noticed movement on the other side. The tanks were approaching us. Then, all of a sudden, we heard this strange sound above us.
The Germans are getting help from the air. In a desperate bid to halt the Soviet advance, they throw everything they have into the battle, including the battered remnants of their once formidable Luftwaffe.
Dive bombers were approaching us unexpectedly and attacking the Russian tanks.
You look up and see that he is dropping the bomb. You go inside the tank, close the lid.
Закрыл и ждешь, попадет, не попадет.
But when I
На
came out
танке,
of the
которые
tank, I
крылья,
used to
баки,
have
запасные,
supplies.
потом все, что
Some
было на
extra stuff,
танке.
some
Так,
extra armor.
знаете, вот эти подкрылки там и
None
все
of
прочее.
it was there.
Ничего не
None of
осталось.
it was left.
Как говорят, как общипанная
Like they say,
курица, это так,
as
так
plucked
стало. Вот
as a
так вот.
chicken.
Die Bomben
The bombs hit the
trafen in die
tanks.
Panzerpulkchen ein.
Created huge craters.
Aufgerissen. Die Panzer rutschten und purzelten regelrecht in diese
The tanks
Trichter
fell into
hinein
these craters
und kamen da
and could
wahrscheinlich
not
auch nie
make it
wieder
out.
raus. Und ich wollte umdrehen.
I wanted to turn as I saw a Russian tank in front of me, 100 meters away. I headed backwards and all of a sudden we got stuck.
He
had hit a stump and the truck spun. We were stuck and couldn't move forward.
Buschgelände und kamen nicht mehr vorwärts. Bin sofort rausgesprungen aus dem Geschütz und habe angesehen, was da los war und habe meine
I jumped out right away to check what was wrong and called out to my two crewmates as well.
Und mit einer Axt haben wir dann mittelgroße Birkenstämme abgehackt und haben die dann untergesetzt unter das Geschütz, dass es höher kam und damit
With an
dann
axe, we
sich
managed to chop up
aushebelte
some
und
logs
praktisch
and
rückwärts
leveled
wieder
the tank free.
freikam.
Then I just shot
Flog in die
and it
Luft.
blew up. The Russian pressure grew stronger and stronger, and we weren't able to hold the front. The infantry had been sent out, and from our Stug unit, there were only 3, 4, or 5 left fighting.
Es war nicht mehr möglich, den gewaltigen Gegendruck des
And
Gegners
so it was impossible to
aufzufangen,
withstand the
aufzuhalten
immense
und die
pressure
neue
of the
Stellung
enemy and
zu
stabilize the new position.
Operation Citadel, Germany's last Eastern Front offensive of the Second World War, is over. The Battle of Kursk ends on July 13, 1943, but the fighting goes on. Now it's the Soviets on the offensive.
After the freeing of places where the German devils resided, after our bombing and bombarding of those places, all of his hiding spots, all of his camps were ruined, wrecked, and defeated.
They begin a relentless pursuit and destruction of German forces that will continue all the way to Berlin. In 8 days of fighting, over 200,000 men are killed or wounded, and nearly 3,000 tanks are destroyed. The battlefield is littered with the dead and with the smoldering hulks of German and Soviet tanks. But the true cost of the battle cannot be measured just in terms of soldiers and tanks. For the real price of war on the Eastern Front has been paid by every man, woman, and child.
I remember all the tragedy. It was in what year? In 1943? That's when the Battle of Kursk was. Everything was destroyed. There was nothing left. They would hang out people. Everyone was dying. What can you say? The field, the entire countryside, was filled with dead soldiers. Everything was ruined.
From behind, you could hear lots of screams. Help! Mama! Don't leave us here. Take us with you. And I stopped and we loaded as many wounded men up on my tank as possible. I encountered lots of terrible things.
What else can I tell you? There is so much to put it all into words. It was colossal. You can't describe it. Bodies lying everywhere. But with our spirit, we defended our motherland.
July 1943, the Eastern Front. Hitler launches an unprecedented panzer blitzkrieg against Stalin's formidable Red Army.
We were more and more convinced that we could do it.
Two armored giants go turret to turret in the biggest tank battle in history.
It's just as if two bulls that run into each other.
Defeat is not an option. At stake is nothing less than the fate of the Second World War.
In my soul, I knew one thing and one thing only. Whether or not I die, I would stay on the spot till death, and I will win.
This is tank warfare at its bloodiest. This is the Battle of Kursk. Brooding across the vast steppes of southern Russia, this bell tower stands guard over the killing fields of Prokhorovka. A sentinel at the epicenter of what was the biggest and bloodiest tank battle ever. Operation Citadel. Hitler's last gamble to turn the tide of the war on the Eastern Front. Since the beginning of 1943, Germany's once unstoppable advance into the Soviet Union has come crashing to a halt, and the Red Army is on the offensive. They've pushed the Germans back 300 kilometers. Hitler's hopes of ultimate victory on the Eastern Front seem to have vanished. In the spring of that year, he prepares for a massive counteroffensive, codenamed Operation Citadel. His plan is to launch a large-scale pincer maneuver to cut off the Soviet-held salient centered on the industrial town of Kursk. The goal, encircle and destroy more than 500,000 Soviet forces in the Kursk Bulge. Leading the attack for the first time are the elite troops of Hitler's Praetorian Guard, 3 Panzer Grenadier divisions of the infamous SS, including the Death Heads.
We were all under 20 or 25, and we were all faithfully German, who believed in their fatherland.
For the attack, the Germans have amassed 780,000 men, close to 10,000 guns, and 2,500 tanks. But the delay gives Stalin the time he needs to prepare. His strategy is to build strength in depth. To meet the expected Panzer onslaught, they begin to lay mines, and thousands of conscripts dig anti-tank ditches and trenches. Their plan, to absorb wave after wave of attacks and bleed the German blitzkrieg dry.
In my soul, I knew one thing, and one thing only. Whether or not I die, I would stay on the spot till death, and I will win. I would only be in one mood, to kill as many Germans as possible.
To meet the impending German attack, the Soviets mobilize almost 2 million men, 25,000 guns, and more than 5,000 tanks. The Soviet war machine goes into overdrive in the months leading up to the battle. What the T-34s may lack in firepower compared to the newer German rivals, they'll make up for in sheer scale of numbers.
And we had many of those tanks, many.
I did not just like the T-34. I was in love with the T-34. Why? Because there was no tank out there that was better.
I love it. I'm in love with that tank.
The T-34 is the backbone of the Soviet Armored Corps. Equipped with a 76mm main cannon and 47mm of sloping frontal armor, the T-34 is a perfect balance of firepower and protection. By the early summer of 1943, the Red Army has dug in thousands of tanks, and across the vast Kursk salient, they've laid more than 400,000 mines and have prepared over 4,000 kilometers of trenches. Finally, they are ready for the Germans to attack. And at midnight on July 5th, that's exactly what the Germans do.
What happened was a sea of fire, constant shooting, constant explosions. The sound was intense to the point of blocking your hearing. Everyone, all of us are scared of dying. That's clear to everyone. But it's important to overpower that feeling. Overpower it.
In the southern sector, the German blitzkrieg is spearheaded by the SS Panzer Grenadier divisions. Their mission to drive straight through the Soviet defensive lines to Kursk, their right flank protected by the 3rd Panzer Corps, whose first objective is to secure a vital bridgehead across the Donets River, and to do it at first light in the face of murderous fire.
We knew that we were the first who had to cross the Donets River, a water obstruction which we knew had steep shores and was quite swampy.
Steile Ufern, war etwas sumpfig.
In front of us were the infantry and the sappers, who had already crossed the river and who had suffered a lot of losses. The Russians knew our intentions and had positioned their artillery, and we were met with huge artillery fire.
Artilleriefeuer.
In the tank, we closed our hatches and we were safe. The sappers were sitting there, only with steel helmets and a whistle in their mouths. The water was as if it were boiling. That's how strong the explosions were. And they just kept doing their work, and we crossed the bridge. That was no problem. But immediately after the bridge was a minefield. There were anti-personnel mines that couldn't harm the tanks. They simply shattered. But the infantry wasn't able to follow us anymore. Our second company was to our right side, and they drove over a field of anti-tank mines. And the tracks of all 10 or 12 Tigers got damaged, and the tanks couldn't continue.
On the right flank, the Germans suffer heavy losses. But nothing can stop the SS in the center. They punch a hole 20 kilometers wide and 15 deep into the Soviet defensive line.
When the skullheads came, they were afraid. We had good soldiers. We just had the reputation that we were just breaking through everywhere. That we were marching and attacking, regardless of the consequences.
And across the vast open steppes, the gunners and tankers of the Red Army must face the onslaught of the Tigers head on.
I was a commander of the 3rd Artillery Company. In order to battle with the tanks, we would create special anti-tank defense locations that were faced toward the danger zones. Of course, we always had to watch out for the Tigers. From my own observing station, we spotted a Tiger that was stationed on a high point on the field and was firing away at our tanks. It just stood there, and it would not let any of our tanks come close. No matter what we did, how we tried to go in from right or left in order to blow it up.
The Tiger tank is the Germans' ultimate armored weapon. Encased in over 100 millimeters of armor, it is practically impervious to frontal attack. But it is the Tiger's 88-millimeter cannon, with a range of more than 2,000 meters, that makes it the most deadly weapon on the vast and sprawling battlefields of the Russian steppes.
We soldiers in the Tiger were very proud. We had the best equipment that existed. It was a good tank, and for the very first time, we were head and shoulders above the Russian tanks.
In order for our tanks to get Tigers or Panthers, we would have to get a minimum of 300-400 meters and get them on their side out. You see the type of the situation we were put in?
And as the Tiger tanks continue their seemingly unstoppable advance, it's not only Kursk that is now at stake, but the fate of the entire Russian motherland.
We had a heavy feeling on our souls. We were contemplating whether or not we would be able to hold them off and hold the territory.
This is the modern-day city of Kursk, an unremarkable relic of the Soviet era in the middle of the vast Russian steppes. But in 1943, it stands at the epicenter of a titanic clash of arms. This is where the world holds its breath, and the fate of two mighty empires is decided. July 5th, Hitler launches Operation Citadel. His elite panzer divisions slam into the Soviet defenses, and the Eastern Front is set ablaze. In a classic pincer maneuver, Hitler launches simultaneous attacks on the Kursk salient. His goal, to encircle and destroy the Red Army. Of the Red Army's T-34s are given orders to advance to meet the German onslaught and shore up a desperate rearguard defense. Their task is daunting: stop the relentless flow of panzers any way they can.
We were headed from north to south, and in the river Psel, where the small streams flow into it after it rains, and created mini valleys. We call it Laga. Well, my tank went into one of those mini valleys. It's like a naturally made trench. When I decided to drive over the edge of the trench, as I was driving my tank up, I saw a German tank directly above me, heading down towards me. I don't think I had any emotions, maybe somewhat of a fear, but I'm not sure. It was so sudden, the tank just showed up. The only overwhelming feeling I had was to get rid of it, to wipe it out or get wiped out. Every tanker knows the best place to shoot at is side armor. And also at the bottom of the tank. And only then, when I got him with the second shot, did the smoke start fuming out. As soon as he wanted to descend, I got him. That saved me. But you know, there was always fear. You can't take that away.
For a full week, the Battle of Kursk rages. Although outgunned by the Tiger, the Soviets have a seemingly inexhaustible supply of T-34s, and Hitler's master plan is beginning to falter. The Tigers of the SS continue their dogged advance towards Kursk. And the 3rd Panzer Corps has been unable to break out of its bridgehead at the Donets River. Leaving the right flank of the SS perilously exposed. With urgent orders to advance, what they haven't been able to achieve by brute force, they now attempt by trickery. A secret midnight thrust straight through the Soviet defenses. It's the bold and daring plan of Major Franz Becker of the 6th Panzer Division.
He was famous, well-known, and a valued tank commander who had a 7th sense for everything that was eventually going to happen. Becker's goal was to win over as much territory as possible to reach our target. Others said, let's wait for the daylight. But he said, this is a perfect time for us to attack. And he did it.
erbeutete T-34 wurden...
Two captured T-34s were placed at the front as a sound camouflage. According to martial law, they had been marked with the German Balkenkreuz, but they had been covered with blankets.
Abgedeckt.
I had ordered radio silence and no firing. Silently, we passed the first enemy barricade, moving by the deadly anti-tank guns, which remained silent, believing us to be one of their own units.
We were able to fool the Russians with the bubbling noise of the T-34s.
Everything was going according to plan, but suddenly a column of 22 tanks appeared heading in the opposite direction. These passed my unit almost track to track. But then 6 or 7 pulled out of the column, turned and pulled in behind us. I ordered the rest to continue and placed my command tank, which was equipped only with a dummy gun, across the road in order to force the enemy tanks to halt.
war kühn.
He was bold. He was a good commander.
We slipped out of our tank, unseen by the Russians. Sneaking up to the tanks, we put magnetic charges on 2 T-34s and jumped into cover. The detonations rang through the night. We fetched 2 more magnetic charges and put them in place.
The blankets were taken away, and we started firing at them. It was a great success for us there. We brought down a lot of Russians.
Der Angriff wurde dann am Tag.
Becca's gamble pays off. With their flank now secure, the SS swing right to mop up one of the last lines of defense at the village of Prokhorovka before their final advance on Kursk. But what the Germans don't yet know is that 500 tanks of the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army are blocking their way. And the biggest battle in the history of armored warfare is about to begin. The steppes of southern Russia. Today, a gently rolling landscape of wheat and rye fields. In 1943, a battlefield, offering little cover and no place to hide for a 60-ton tank. July 11th, 1943. Day 7 of Operation Citadel. The SS Panzer Grenadier divisions have blasted a hole 50 kilometers through the Soviet defenses. And the Battle of Kursk is about to come to a climax of unbelievable violence. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army has been held in reserve more than 100 kilometers behind the front lines. But fearing that all might be lost in the face of the German onslaught, they are now rushed into action to the south of Kursk and prepare to launch a massive counteroffensive on the Germans' right flank from the village of Prokhorovka. At precisely the same moment, the SS swings east, also towards Prokhorovka. Neither side is aware of what the other one is doing, and almost by accident, the stage is set for the deciding tank battle of the Eastern Front. Evening, July 11th. From his command post at Prokhorovka, Soviet Lieutenant General Rotmistrov, commander of the 5th Guards Tank Army, spies tanks in the distance. At first, he thinks they are advance units of his own Soviet T-34s. But then, he gets a surprise.
He took binoculars and saw that those were German tanks. It turns out that the Germans decided to carry out their offensive through Prokhorovka.
Events have outpaced the Soviet plans for a counterattack. Now they must prepare to meet the German SS head-on.
We had a very heavy feeling on our souls. By the order of the main commander general, we were to stay and fight to the death and not let the enemy take over Prokhorovka.
July 12th, dawn. The rumbling of tanks' engines can be heard from miles around as 300 German tanks and 500 Soviet T-34s prepare for battle. From behind a railway embankment on the Russian left flank, Savily Ilyich commands a Soviet anti-tank gun emplacement. And at 0830 hours is one of the first to spot the massed ranks of the SS advancing.
The entire field of Prokhorovka was covered with moving tanks. We aimed at the bottom of the tank or towards the lid of the tank. If the little cross mark was resting on either of those points, then the missile would go directly where it's aimed. It won't sway to the right or left. It'll go directly to the target. The 76mm gun would have 25 shots per minute. And that's how you could battle with the tanks through direct aiming.
You were learning quickly during this war. For example, we were all able to tell the difference whether it was a heavy artillery or light artillery firing at us. We were able to hear if anti-tank guns were fired. Every projectile made a different noise. It was very important to recognize what was firing and where it was coming from.
Schießt und woher es kommt.
And the armor-piercing ammo had a special mass inside it. When it collided with armor, it would burn through and through.
The Soviet armor-piercing shell has a high explosive filler, designed to pierce 55 millimeters of armor plating at a distance of 1,000 meters, exploding on impact and destroying the enemy tank from within.
The tank would go up in flames. Fire would burn, and that's what would happen.
When several of our tanks had been shot, men suffered terrible burns. A tank on my left side caught fire, and they were screaming terribly. The tankers who made it out had terrible burns on the upper body down to the belt. It was frightful.
North of the railway embankment, in the center of the battlefield, Tank Commander Rudolf von Ribbentrop is in the first wave of the German advance towards Prokhorovka, when the Soviets take the extraordinary and reckless decision to meet them head-on.
What I saw left me speechless. From beyond the shallow rise, about 150 to 200 meters in front of me, appeared tank after tank, wave after wave. There were too many to count. It was a simply unimaginable assembly, and it was moving at a very high speed.
And suddenly, we're on the same path, face to face. They didn't expect us to come upon them so fast, and we didn't expect them either.
The SS adopt the Panzerkeil, a wedge-shaped formation with Tigers at the point and lighter Panzer IVs at the side. Their aim to use their heavy armor to bulldoze straight through the enemy lines. Soviet T-34s lead a cavalry charge across the open fields to meet the deadly Panzerkeil. Outgunned by the Tigers, their only hope is to get as close as possible, as quickly as possible.
They probably thought we would be farther off, but no. Here, there were two huge masses colliding. And at first, everyone was sort of confused and dumbfounded.
At that second, I said to myself, it's all over now.
We started killing each other, head on.
July 12th, 1943. In his pursuit of victory on the Eastern Front, Hitler has gambled everything on the success of Operation Citadel. And the mettle of his feared panzer divisions is put to the test on the steppes of southern Russia. In the northern sector, the advance of the German Ninth Army has ground to a halt, still 80 kilometers short of its objective of Kursk. Everything now hinges on success in the south, where the SS have come up against the Soviet Fifth Guards Tank Army on the fields of Prokhorovka. Needing to get within range, the Soviet T-34s charge at full throttle against the advancing SS. It's an all-out fight for survival at point-blank range.
They probably thought we would be farther off, but no. Here, there were two huge masses colliding. And at first, everyone was sort of confused and dumbfounded.
In the first wave of the German advance is SS tank commander Rudolf von Ribbentrop.
My driver called over the intercom. Sir, 'tis right, right. The gunner traversed right. Soon the first round was on its way, and with its impact, the T-34 began to burn. At the same instant, the tank next to me took a direct hit and went up in flames. His neighbor was also hit. We had no time to take up defensive positions. All we could do was fire. From this range, every round was a hit. I realized there was no chance of escape. All we could do was take care of what was at hand.
The battlefield is a chaotic mass of tanks firing at point-blank range. For the tankers on both sides, it's kill or be killed.
And so it began, shooting at each other practically point-blank. 100 yards, 200 yards. You did not need a long-range gun. You can just shoot head-on. No one knew the situation. Not the army generals, not battalion generals, not any of the commanders of brigades.
We were prepared. We were young guys. Order is order, and attack is attack. But we couldn't know that a battle like this would develop, and we were just unimportant grunts. Maybe the generals might have known this, but I don't think they knew that it might degenerate in this way.
Sie haben das auch nicht gewusst, dass sich das so ausartete als so eine Schlacht.
It was a test of nerves for people. That's why at that age I got my silver hair early. Became silver-headed.
By midday, the entire battlefield has been set ablaze and become a hellish inferno.
The fires were burning, the cars were burning, and tanks were burning. The field crops were burning. Everything was ablaze. It was a horrid battle. There are clouds of smoke, as if it was a dark evening.
There's slaughter in the fields below, and from the skies above, death rains down in torrents.
Everyone was bombing. We were bombing, Germans were bombing. The Germans, I don't think they had targets, and that's all.
The carnage is indiscriminate. Death comes from every angle, and it's the tankers who are caught in the middle.
A person is scared of death. No one wants to die. I still cannot understand how my tank got hit. Either it was a bomb or it was artillery. But it burned, and that's a fact. And it burned because it was totally loaded with ammunition and such. And we had extra gas. All of that burns. All of it is fire. Fire consumes everything. I decided to evacuate that tank. I said, we need to evacuate, Lieutenant. The lieutenant was burning up, so he couldn't say a word. My comrade that was sitting beside me opened the lid of the tank ahead of me. Then when I was taken out of it, all I heard was the explosion. I still remember this battle. Still remember it.
Only 2 members of Pavel's crew escape alive. Tank losses are reaching catastrophic proportions on both sides. But it's clear the Soviets are losing more. With defeat not an option, the Soviet T-34s attempt to block the German advance in whatever way they can, including a desperate tactic of last resort, never before witnessed in armored warfare.
Some of them had probably received the order to drive onto our tanks. It's just as if 2 bulls would run into each other.
July 12, 1943. The Battle of Kursk has raged for 7 days, and Operation Citadel, Hitler's last-ditch gamble to snatch victory on the Eastern Front, is about to come to a bloody climax on the fields of Prokhorovka. 300 tanks of the SS Panzer Grenadier Divisions and 500 tanks of the Soviet Red Army clash head-to-head on a battlefield measuring just 4 kilometers by 6. It's the greatest concentration of armored firepower ever yet assembled, and a desperate fight to the death. The tankers of the elite SS have been prepared for the bloodiest of battles. But this is warfare like no one has ever seen before, and nothing could have prepared them for the kind of tank carnage now heading their way.
You have to imagine tank beside tank. One big chain of tanks. And on the other side were T-34s. And some of them had probably received the order to drive onto our tanks. Each one wants to be stronger than the other. That's exactly how it was there. It's just as if two bulls would run into each other. Suddenly our tanks were disabled. They themselves couldn't do anything anymore either, because they had disabled our tanks. Because once they were on them, you couldn't move the turret or anything. We had never experienced that. It was the first time that the Russians had driven onto our tanks. That was their showstopper. There were some crazy things, all the stuff that they thought of.
With just an hour's daylight remaining, whoever wins on this battlefield will win Kursk. And it's the German tankers who, in the bloodbath, now sense victory is within their grasp.
We were more and more convinced that we could do it.
I want to tell you something. We weren't afraid. So we just kept attacking and attacking.
The SS advances relentlessly into the firestorm. The Soviet tank divisions are pushed back almost to the edge of Prokhorovka, and panic now sweeps through the Russian ranks.
And we just said, just like that, the lines are splitting, battalions are splitting, army is backing. And we were backing up the 5th Army.
But the Red Army generals won't give up. They send wave after wave of T-34s into the fight. No matter how many T-34s the Germans destroy, more and more keep appearing to take their place. Rudolf von Ribbentrop is overtaken by the avalanche of Soviet T-34s.
At this point, remaining stationary was the surest means of being destroyed by the Russian tanks. Just then, a T-34 halted about 30 meters off to our right. I saw the tank rock slightly on its suspension and traverse its turret in our direction. I was looking right down the muzzle of its gun. "Step on it now," I shouted into the microphone. My driver had already put it into gear. We moved past the T-34. The Russian tried to turn his turret to follow us, but was unable to do so. We halted 10 meters behind the stationary T-34 and turned. My gunner scored a direct hit on the Russian's turret. T-34 exploded, and its turret flew about 3 meters through the air, almost striking my tank's gun. While all of this was going on, other T-34s were rolling past us.
At day's end, after 11 hours of butchery, neither side has gained any ground at all. The Germans and Soviets are back literally where they first started. The battlefield belongs to neither, and Prokhorovka is strewn with the burned-out corpses of their tanks.
The battlefield seemed like a cemetery of armored tanks and technology. On the entire field, on the ravines, on the edges of the forest, lay hundreds of damaged German and Soviet tanks.
At Kursk, the German blitzkrieg on the Eastern Front has hit its brick wall. In the face of fierce Soviet resistance, neither arm of Hitler's pincer has come anywhere near to reaching its target, and Kursk itself remains unscathed. Losses on both sides are enormous. Operation Citadel has taken the lives of 80,000 men and destroyed nearly 3,000 tanks. But the Soviets have held off the Germans. For the Red Army, it will be remembered as a great victory. The day after Prokhorovka, with news of the Allied invasion of southern Italy, Hitler calls off Operation Citadel altogether to deal with a war which is now on two fronts. The battle for Kursk is over, and for the Germans it represents a massive and irreparable failure. From these fields of Prokhorovka, they begin a retreat which within 2 years will take them all the way back to Berlin.
For our morale, it was really upsetting for everybody. What? We're going back? That doesn't happen to us. We didn't shout hooray anymore.
In a single day on these killing fields of Prokhorovka, death harvested thousands of soldiers' lives. For many, it is a place of sacred memory, where the heroism of the Red Army's tank crews saved the Russian motherland.
This was the turning point for the Red Army. I remember my friends who have passed away. I'm always remembering them. Always, always will be remembering them. My friends. May they rest in peace, as they say in heaven.
Царство им, как говорится, небесное.
La Cambre German Military Cemetery, Normandy, France. 21,000 graves, a monument to the death of the German army in Normandy and to the downfall of Adolf Hitler's reviled Third Reich. And yet amongst the rows of unadorned gravestones, there is one man's grave that is always honored with fresh flowers. His name, Michael Wittmann. Wittmann is considered the greatest tank ace of all time.
He was the ace of aces. Many people say that he was a very quiet, likable man. He wasn't your typical Nazi.
Most tank commanders weren't personally decorated by Hitler, but most didn't quite stand out with the number of kills that Wittmann did. Wittmann's mentality was aggressive, motivated, disciplined, kind of encapsulates the Panzer arm of World War II into a person.
Wittmann died here in the fields of Normandy. But his legend began in the fields of Bavaria. Born in 1914 on a farm south of Nuremberg, Wittmann was a country boy living the healthy outdoor life. At 19, Wittmann is drafted into the army for compulsory service, as all young men are in the Germany of Adolf Hitler. In 1937, after completing his service, Michael Wittmann, aged 23, eagerly volunteers for Hitler's personal bodyguard, the Leibstandarte, SS Adolf Hitler.
It's an elite unit. They were in parades, they were very regimented. It would have been hand-picked personnel. They would have had certain height and physical fitness requirements, a certain look. He's not only a volunteer, but he's seemingly politically indoctrinated to want to be part of this unit.
I swear to thee, Adolf Hitler, as Führer and Chancellor of the German Reich, loyalty and bravery. I vow to thee obedience unto death.
Being the honor guard, I'm sure it was very appealing to somebody in their early 20s. With the black uniforms and the smart look and the whole elite quality about them.
Michael Whitman embraces absolute loyalty to Adolf Hitler and his policy of persecution of the Jews, and to his program of conquest and expansion of the Third Reich. But in September 1939, Hitler invades Poland, triggering the Second World War. Now, for Whitman and his generation of young Nazis, the parades are over and the fighting begins. Because of his excellence as a driver, Whitman is given command of a reconnaissance vehicle. By early summer 1941, the Nazis are the masters of Europe. But for Adolf Hitler, the real prize lies to the east, the Soviet Empire, vast spaces for the master race to conquer and colonize. June 22nd, 1941, Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Codename Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German soldiers, led by 3,600 tanks, plunge into the Soviet Union. Against the Germans, the Soviets mobilize 2.9 million men and 20,000 tanks. Despite their superior numbers, the Soviets are quickly overwhelmed by the speed and skill of the German panzers. Michael Whitman's reconnaissance unit races over the Soviet frontier with the Leibstandarte, part of the leading armored force.
Hitler's armored divisions were important in the fact that they were the ones that were spearheading the advances. The whole mentality of the tank force was always keep moving.
Whitman and the Leibstandarte are now part of the notorious Waffen-SS.
The Waffen-SS had a few premier divisions, Leibstandarte being one of them, that maintained its elite status throughout the war.
As the panzers slash hundreds of kilometers through Russian defenses, millions of prisoners are taken.
The Waffen-SS does have a reputation for committing atrocities on the Eastern Front.
Over 3 million will be shot or starved to death. 3 weeks after the invasion, the Leibstandarte is closing in on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. At the forefront is Reconnaissance Sergeant Michael Whitman. July 12, 1941. The panzers advance over hilly, wooded country. As they near the city of Zhytomyr, 200 kilometers southwest of Kiev, the Soviets counterattack. Dozens of Soviet T-34 tanks bear down on the Leibstandarte. The T-34 has been a shock for the Germans. Weighing 26 tons, the T-34 is heavily armored with sloping sides to deflect shells. Armed with a powerful 76.2 millimeter gun, it is better than anything the Germans can field. Whitman is ordered to reconnoiter the enemy forces in a Sturmgeschütz 3 or Stug.
Whitman drove his Sturmgeschütz to high ground to try to locate the Soviets. He spotted 2 groups of Soviet T-34 tanks, 6 coming from northeast and another 12 from the east. That meant 18 T-34s against Whitman's single assault gun. It was no match. Whitman had to act quickly to even the odds. He ordered his driver to take the Sturmgeschütz off the high ground.
Whitman has been ordered not to engage the enemy tanks, as the heavier T-34s outgun his Sturmgeschütz 3.
Sturmgeschütz is designed initially to be infantry support. It's not designed to engage other tanks.
Built on the chassis of a Panzer III, the Stug is a turretless assault gun. which means the driver has to swing the whole vehicle around to aim its high-velocity 75mm cannon.
The Sturmgeschütz has a movable cannon of 24 degrees only. You have to face the enemy straight forward, not from the side. If you see the enemy, you have to turn.
Despite being outnumbered and outmatched by the Russian tanks, Whitman disobeys his orders and attacks the T-34s.
His personality that was mated to the Panzer credo of attack, that would have been the first thing he was looking for, was an opportunity to be preempted.
As the T-34 surged forward towards the crest of the hill, Whitman's only hope was to set up an ambush. It was a direct hit. A second T-34 surged over the hill. It went up in flames. A third T-34 managed to get a shot at Whitman's Sturmgeschütz.
The T-34s were not as accurate, we thought at least, than ours.
More Russian tanks poured forward. There were just too many. Whitman headed for cover. He used the assault gun's low profile to hide it in a small wood.
I liked the Sturmgeschütz because of the low silhouette. And that gave me a feeling being safer.
But facing so many T-34s, there was nowhere for him to hide. Whitman's driver swiveled the Stug to bring its gun to bear on the Russian.
Firing would have definitely been an issue because of the inability to track a target via a turret. You would have to maneuver the vehicle.
And again, his gunner scored a direct hit.
With the T-34, the only weak part is between the turret and the body, to get right into the crack.
Another T-34 tried to target the thin side armor on the Sturmgeschütz. Whitman had to turn quickly and fire before the Russian got in a shot.
You hit the tracks if you can. When the tracks burst, of course, he just goes around in a circle.
With his fast maneuvering, Whitman began to even the odds. Then, 3 more enemy tanks attacked. Whitman opened fire. Only one of the Soviet tanks escaped.
6 of the formidable T-34s destroyed in just a few minutes. Whitman and his crew stopped the Soviet armored attack. For his actions, Whitman is awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. Impressed by his exploits, Whitman's commanders send him back to Germany to train to become an officer of the SS. Whitman's career is on the rise. Autumn 1942, Bad Tölz, Germany. Michael Whitman begins his training in Heinrich Himmler's Waffen-SS school. Its aim is to form a new SS military elite, the future leaders of Hitler's Nazi empire. Whitman graduates as an SS second lieutenant and is soon training on Germany's newest tank, the Tiger. Hitler's answer to the Soviet T-34, it is the most formidable tank in the world. At 100 millimeters, the Tiger's frontal armor is virtually impregnable. Its 88-millimeter gun can cut through a T-34 at over 2 kilometers.
Wir waren und Tigerleute, waren stolz, hatten das beste Gerät, was wir hatten. Und es war auch ein guter Panzer. Und wir waren zum ersten Mal den russischen Panzern haushoch überlegen.
In February 1943, Whitman is called back to the Russian front as part of the Leibstandart's new Tiger Company. But by the summer, the tide of battle is turning against Germany. Soviet forces surge west, creating a huge bulge protruding into the German lines near the Russian city of Kursk. Desperate to regain the initiative, Adolf Hitler plans a counteroffensive, Operation Citadel. It will be a two-pronged attack from north and south to chop off the bulge, leaving 500,000 Soviet soldiers cut off and trapped. For the Citadel offensive, the Germans have amassed 780,000 men and 2,500 tanks. To meet the Germans, the Soviets field almost 2 million men and more than 5,000 tanks. The Leibstandarte will be at the front of the southern attack. With them at the spearhead will be Michael Wittmann, now commanding a platoon of 5 Tiger tanks. On the eve of battle, Wittmann's commander reads out Adolf Hitler's message to the crews.
Soldiers, today you set out on a great offensive, whose result can decisively affect the outcome of the war. My soldiers, now, finally, you have better tanks than the enemy. The German homeland looks to you with ardent confidence.
We just thought we were superior to the Russian tanks. At least we were brainwashed to believe that, which helps to make you feel superior, you know. You know what propaganda does.
July 5th, 1943. At dawn, the Tiger crews wait for their attack to begin.
The order came over the tank radios. Panzers, forward! As we advanced, we were met by a relentless storm of fire. The Russians had prepared line after line of defenses, which dug in T-34s.
Because the T-34 was inferior to the Tiger I, it needed to compensate for its deficiencies. One of the ways was to have pre-dug positions for the vehicles. The incoming round would have to penetrate several feet of dirt to be able to actually get to the vehicle itself.
The Tiger's powerful 88mm gun is able to break through the Russian defenses. While the Russian shells bounce off the Tiger's armor.
Overcoming line after line of Russian defense, Wittmann and the Tigers pushed towards their objective. But the Russians continued to throw wave after wave of tanks at our advance. These were all fresh targets for Wittmann's gunner. Wittmann's tank kept moving, firing as it turned, smashing one T-34 after another.
Knocking out 8 tanks and 12 anti-tank guns, this first day of battle has been a success for Wittmann and his elite crew.
We call it zusammengespielt, played together, you know, so that one interacts with the other the right way. The loader, the gunner, the commander, the driver, the radio man. It's a tightly knit group.
July 12th, 1943. The Germans set off to assault the final Soviet defense line before Kursk. Wittmann's commander is wounded, and Wittmann must take over command of the Leibstandarte's Tiger Company, just as the Battle of Kursk is about to reach its climax. Unknown to the Germans, the Russians are preparing a desperate last-ditch counterattack.
The Germans were on the verge of breaking through into open country, and the Soviets were starting to panic. They were going to throw whatever they had available into the mix.
The Russians send 500 tanks west to attack the German right flank, but the Waffen-SS tanks turn east. These huge tank forces are about to collide near the little town of Prokhorovka. Second Lieutenant Wittmann and his crew are ordered to high ground.
In the distance, what seemed like a dust cloud was rising. Suddenly, hundreds of Soviet tanks appeared at the crest of a hill, headed straight towards Wittmann. We were in shock. The Soviets were not on the defensive, they were attacking.
Just 1,600 meters from Wittmann, more than 100 Soviet tanks are charging towards him, over the gently rolling land of the steppe.
We had a number of hills, but it was predominantly open terrain, so the Tiger tank could engage at long distance.
With a well-aimed shot, a Tiger can knock out a T-34 at a distance of 2 kilometers. But the Russian tanks have to get much closer before their guns can have any effect on the Tigers.
Wir kamen im Angriff, man muss sich das so vorstellen, Panzer an Panzer, die große Kette, und auf der anderen Seite kam die T-34 an.
The T-34s raced towards us, trying to close the deadly gap. They came back into view, now only 800 meters away. The Tigers opened fire.
A lot of tanks in a relatively small area. Something of a shooting gallery from a Tiger I commander's perspective.
The T-34s were still not close enough to penetrate the armor of the Tigers, so they had to keep advancing, straight through our barrage. They got to 700 meters. Getting closer. And closer. The Tiger guns were belching fire, but there were too many. They couldn't all be stopped.
В это время немцы уже наступали, немецкие войска. Они были на ходу.
The Russians slam into the SS formation.
Они рассчитывали, что мы в контратаке это будем, а тут хлестнули две массы.
At close range, the German tanks are vulnerable. Wittmann's Tigers spring into action. Wittmann's gunner fires on the move, again and again.
One of the reasons that Wittmann was so successful as a Tiger commander was his ability to fire while moving with the vehicle. That way they could acquire the target, but they'd get rounds on the target more quickly. Such a technique wasn't normal. In fact, German regulations stressed that the tanks should not fire when on the move. It's basically a waste of ammunition.
But Wittmann and his crew have mastered the difficult technique, using it to their advantage.
From Wittmann's perspective, Prokhorovka would have just been chaos. They would have had firing at close range.
Wittmann's tank is hit twice, but keeps on fighting.
Gemetzelt auf beiden Seiten, Panzer auf Panzer.
The battle rages for hours. The Russians take appalling losses. But they succeed in slowing the German advance.
Бомбила наша авиация, бомбила немецкая. Я думал, что они, наверное, даже цель не искали. Бросали бомбы и все.
Kursk is considered one of the greatest tank battles in history because of the numbers of tanks and other armored vehicles involved in a relatively small area.
Our Tiger Company had a series of fine successes. Over the whole Citadel Kursk battle, we destroyed 151 enemy tanks.
Despite the success of the Tiger units, the ferocious Russian defenses has stopped Hitler's offensive. The Germans have lost the decisive tank battle on the Eastern Front. From now on, Michael Wittmann will be fighting for his and for Nazi Germany's survival. In its third winter on the Eastern Front, the German army is in full retreat. The Russians have pushed them 500 kilometers from Kursk back into the Ukraine. Michael Wittmann's Tiger unit is fighting a series of desperate rearguard actions.
Tiger units would have been sent from one sector of the front to the other to try and plug gaps that had been opened up by Soviet armored forces and attempted to blunt them so that way German forces can continue their retreat to the west.
The rapid Russian advance leaves the Soviet supply lines stretched dangerously thin, making supply convoys a vital necessity. December 6, 1943. Wittmann and his unit, now designated the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion, are poised to attack a Soviet supply convoy near the town of Brusilov. But between the convoy and the Tigers are batteries of Russian anti-tank guns. The Soviet 76.2 millimeter divisional gun is a tank killer. It can smash through a Tiger's side armor at a distance of nearly 1,000 meters and wreck its tracks. To kill these anti-tank batteries, Wittmann's tactic is to play a dangerous game, using himself and his tank as bait.
Wittmann drove to high ground. He was tempting the Russian gunners to fire at him. They took the bait, but now the gunners had revealed their positions. Under heavy fire, Wittmann quickly retreated. Then our Tigers raced at the anti-tank guns from their blind spots, charging straight at them before the Russians could turn the guns around.
Wittmann's tactic has worked. The anti-tank batteries are now a smoking wreck. But his Tiger reveals just how dangerous Wittmann's game can be.
We counted a total of 28 hits on the Tiger. Some of them were smaller, of course, but there were also some big enough to easily put one's fist into.
With the anti-tank batteries eliminated, Wittmann races towards the supply road. He drives into cover to observe the road, and he spots a convoy. Though he's heavily outnumbered, Wittmann decides to attack on his own.
Wittmann would have been trying to make the best of a bad situation. He would have been increasingly reckless due to necessity in engaging enemy targets.
Like a wolf attacking its prey, he quickly knocks out the lead tank and the rear tank, leaving the convoy trapped on the road at his mercy.
Wittmann blasted the enemy with furious barrages of gunfire. He placed his fiery mark on the road, smashing long lines of Soviet vehicles into junk. This caused mass confusion amongst the Soviets.
Wittmann's daring lone wolf attack has worked brilliantly. The Russian convoy has been destroyed. Over the next few weeks, he goes on a rampage, knocking out 61 enemy tanks. His total kills soon reach 117. He paints the number of kills on his tank barrel. On January 16, 1944, Wittmann is awarded the Knight's Cross, Nazi Germany's second highest military honor. Then, just a few weeks later, his Knight's Cross is upgraded with oak leaves, and he is promoted to first lieutenant. On February 2nd, 1944, Whitman is called to the Führer's Eastern Front headquarters to receive his new commendation from Adolf Hitler himself.
I think one of the reasons that Whitman was decorated to the degree that he was that he was part of the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler Division, and that's Hitler's name in the unit.
Whitman is now ordered back to Germany, where his exploits have already made him famous. But the country he finds upon his return is in ruins, a result of Allied bombing.
The sight of such senseless destruction of our cities is enough to make one's heart bleed. The Anglo-Americans have taught us to hate. They will see this hate transformed into energy. We desire one thing: to get them in front of our guns. We have only one watchword, and that is revenge.
The war effort was definitely going against Germany, and they were looking for ways to keep up the public morale. He visited the Henschel factory where the Tiger One was made and made a speech to the workers there. I think Whitman was used as propaganda for the Nazi Party, but I don't think it was totally unwilling on his part. I think it was just another way of contributing to the war effort. The Reich made him a celebrity intentionally.
During his triumphal tour of Germany, Whitman marries 19-year-old Hildegard Burmester. The couple is offered a special wedding gift: Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf.
Hitler went to Whitman's wedding. A tank ace in Germany was so important.
Before he can arrange a honeymoon for his young bride, Whitman receives a new posting. So his wife accompanies him with his Tiger Battalion to the Chateau Elbeuf in Normandy, France. Michael Whitman will soon have his chance at revenge on Germany's enemies. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces land in Normandy. Hitler orders his panzer forces to drive the Allies back into the sea. For Michael Whitman and his Tigers, the Allied beachhead is over 200 kilometers away.
Whitman started off on June 6 with 45 Tiger tanks, which is a full complement for that 101st Heavy SS Tank Battalion.
But it takes Whitman 5 harrowing days to get his second company to the Normandy battlefield, under unrelenting attacks by Allied fighter bombers that decimate his forces.
And a week later, it was down to about 6 vehicles that were serviceable.
Whitman and the 101st SS Heavy Panzer Battalion are positioned on the left and most crucial sector of the front, facing the British and the Canadians.
The Germans would have concentrated their armored units around the British and Canadian sector, because if that sector had fallen, that would have been the shortest route to Germany. So they had to hold that with their stronger units.
The Allies are preparing the break out of the beachhead. Their plan is to send the British 7th Armored Division towards the key city of Caen, through the town of Villers-Bocage. June 13th, 1944. Sheltering from Allied bombers, Whitman positions his surviving Tigers under the cover of trees, near Villers-Bocage.
The British 22nd Armored Brigade was moving through the town.
The column of British tanks is just 200 meters from Whitman's position. The British do not know Whitman is there, but they are about to find out.
Then a man came into the command post and said, "Obersturmführer, tanks are driving past. I don't think they're German." I had no idea that the enemy might suddenly appear.
Whitman saw that there was an opportunity and that the British armored vehicles were in a nice, neat line approaching his position.
I went outside and saw English and American tanks rolling past, about 150 to 200 meters distance. Never had I been so impressed by the strength of the enemy as I was by those tanks rolling by.
Whitman is facing 138 tanks and armored vehicles, while he has only 6 tanks.
The decision to attack was a very difficult one, but I knew it absolutely had to be, and I decided to strike out at the enemy.
Whitman's split-second decision will become legendary.
I had no time to assemble my company. I set off with 1 tank. I drove up to the column, surprised the English as much as they had surprised me. I first knocked out 2 tanks from the right of the column, then 1 from the left.
With them being in such close proximity to each other, there was no room to maneuver.
I then turned about to the left and attacked the armored troop carriers in the middle of the armored regiment. They never left the road. They were so surprised that they took to flight, but not with their vehicles. Instead, they jumped out, and I shot up the battalion's vehicles as I drove by. I drove towards the rear of the column on the same road, knocking out every tank that came toward me. The enemy was thrown into total confusion. I was able to take out tanks as well as armored troop carriers. Then I drove straight into the town of Villers-Bocage.
The town has already been occupied by British armor. Whitman continues his single-handed attack, claiming a total of 21 Allied tanks destroyed.
I got to approximately the center of town, where I was hit by an anti-tank gun. My tank was disabled. I fired at and destroyed everything around me that I could reach. I then abandoned the tank.
Whitman's deadly rampage has lasted barely 15 minutes, but he has devastated an entire enemy regiment.
By single-handedly knocking out the British column, it kept the Allies from taking the area around Caen for 2 months, and it added to the mystique of Whitman's abilities as a panzer commander.
German newsreels make the most of the Allied setback at Villers-Bocage.
In den engen Straßen wurde eine stärkere amerikanische Panzereinheit gestellt und zusammengeschossen.
Whitman is the most famous tank officer in the German army.
Rund 1000
But the following day, the stress of battle shows on his face. Whitman is celebrated for his astounding feat by 1st SS Panzer Corps commander Sepp Dietrich, who recommends him for yet another commendation. In July, Whitman is once again personally decorated by Hitler, this time adding 2 swords to his Knight's Cross with oak leaves.
Whitman was the most decorated tank commander, not only for his experience on the battlefield, but I would think also for the propaganda value that could be showcased through him.
And so Michael Whitman reaches the height of his fame in Normandy. And it is in Normandy that his fate and his myth will be sealed. August 8th, 1944, 2 months after Villers-Bocage. Michael Whitman is now a captain and acting commander of his battalion. Yet as Whitman's career soars, Hitler's army in Normandy is headed towards destruction. Now the Allies launch a decisive punch, codenamed Operation Totalize. British and Canadian armor storms along the Caen-Falaise road, smashing 14 kilometers through the German lines towards the village of Sinto. As 300 Allied tanks bear down on Sinto, the 12th SS Panzer Division is ordered to bar their advance. With the remnants of the heavily outnumbered division is Captain Michael Whitman, with a small group of Tiger tanks. The division's leader, Colonel Kurt Mayer, now orders an immediate counterattack.
Whitman's Tigers were standing ready behind a hedge east of Sinto. We had to risk the attack in order to win time.
It was almost suicidal for the Germans to mount that attack, but this was their system. If they were hit, they would hit back immediately.
Whitman is in reserve, but he insists on leading the attack.
Michael said to me, I must be in the attack myself, for the other officers can barely cope.
Kurt Mayer knows the situation is hopeless.
I shook Michael Whitman's hand. Michael laughed his youthful laugh and climbed into his Tiger.
And so Michael Whitman sets off on the attack. Just 8 German tanks advancing against 300 Allied tanks.
I don't think Whitman is exactly a fatalist. I don't think that he just figured that he was going to die, maybe this was the best place to do it. Whitman and probably his crew didn't think so much about their own personal safety as the overall war effort.
What Whitman doesn't know is there is a hidden danger waiting for him on either side of the Caen-Falaise road. British tanks of the Northamptonshire Yeomanry are lying in wait in the woods to his right. Canadian tanks of the Sherbrooke Fusiliers are hidden behind a wall to his left.
We drove off, Michael right of the road and I left of the road. Approximately 800 meters to Michael's right, there was a small wood, which looked suspicious.
British tanks hidden in the woods observe Whitman.
There were certainly four Tigers, which came down on what would have been our side of the main road. The Canadians of the Sherbrooks were, as far as I can see, actually much nearer, but they were on the other side of the main road.
The Canadian tanks are hidden from Whitman's view behind a long chateau wall.
We sneaked up right beside a brick wall and got in reasonable cover. Just hit the wall just enough that you could get your gun, that you could move it sufficiently. I could see on the right the first German tanks came out from Sinto. Right away, I can remember the wireless net becoming active. I can see them, I can see them.
I saw this Tigers come in, across in front of us, about 1,200 yards away. My tank commander, he said, well, wait till they get to about 800 yards.
We drove about 1 to 1.5 kilometers.
I was now starting to get a bit itchy.
The Allies not only have the element of surprise, they have a new tank, the Sherman Firefly. The Firefly, upgunned with a powerful 17-pounder cannon, is able to penetrate 130 millimeters of steel, enough for even the thickest armor on a Tiger.
For the first time, we realized that we now had a tank which was equal to the Tiger.
Whitman's Tigers are now in the kill zone.
With my eyes, I could see the tank closest to the road, about 200 yards, I guess.
The tank commander said, advance driver, and we pull out of cover. As we pull out of cover, he says, target the rear target. I fired.
We began taking heavy fire, and then I received a radio message from Michael.
Achtung! Achtung! Von rechts!
I'd look round at the second tank. I fired one shot at the second tank. The loader reloads. Again, fired and ready.
3 of the 4 Tigers are now knocked out. Whitman's tank moves on alone. From close range, the Canadians now open fire at Whitman's tank.
The one that he was in, I think, went by me. Other people from my squadron were firing at it now.
Whitman's Tiger is hit.
When I got to within 300 meters of Michael's Tiger, flames suddenly shot from the tank.
I can remember a tremendous explosion and seeing the turret hit the ground.
August 8th, 1944. Michael Whitman has fought his final battle.
Whether his last thoughts as he went down the road were simply, Valhalla, here I come, a sort of a death wish. He must have known there was no way they were going to win.
August 25th, just days after Whitman's death, the German army in Normandy is defeated. Many of Hitler's soldiers remain in Normandy, buried in La Cam German military cemetery. Somber gravestones recall the unheralded end of the Nazi Empire. Yet Michael Whitman is still celebrated.
I think there's a myth to Michael Whitman's combat experiences. People look at him as, yes, being a Nazi, but it's not the reason that they admire his abilities in combat. I think if you're on the receiving end of that, you're going to have a different perspective.
He accepted the doctrines of Hitler enough to get in his tank and invade other people's countries, country after country, to kill men, women, and children. He might have been a hero to the Germans, but not to me.
Even though it's been 60 years after Whitman's death, his legacy, his mystique, maintains to today.
I swear to thee, Adolf Hitler, as Führer and Chancellor of the German Reich, obedience unto death.